Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us this morning here at the glamorous GroupM Rooftop here at the Martinez in sunny Cannes. I'm joined for the next 20 minutes with three outstanding experts who I'll introduce in a moment. But we're going to be spending some time with you talking about, well, a whole range of things. Some new research that we've commissioned here at GroupM, the way that research is consumed and used and integrated into client and industry dialogues. Perhaps we'll stray onto Elon Musk in lifts or the availability of Cybertrucks, but I think our main theme is most likely to be on research. I'm going to ask my panel to briefly introduce themselves and perhaps just explain not only where you're from, but what your relationship to research in the industry is. Are you a user, a buyer, a fan? Oh, sorry.
I'll start. Hi everyone, my name is Lilia Fuse. I am a general manager for oral care for Europe at Colgate-Palmolive. Previously, I've been the marketing director for Central Europe East, so I was an avid client of media and a big fan still to this day.
My name's Alex Brownsell. I'm the head of content at Walk, particularly Walk Media. And we're a publisher of research, I suppose, primarily, occasionally a commissioner of, and our job is scouring the industry for the latest nuggets and then trying to sort of make sense of how it all fits together.
Fantastic. Love a nugget.
Useful. And I'm Felipe Thomaz. I'm an associate professor of marketing at the University of Oxford and deputy director of the Oxford Future Marketing Initiative. And I'm a compulsive researcher.
Fantastic. How's that for a panel? That's super impressive. Thank you all very much for joining us. Felipe, perhaps if I can start with you. We've been working together for the last couple of months on how Sci Business School and GroupM can perhaps use some proprietary data to answer questions that aren't frequently enough asked, perhaps, in the industry. I don't know if you could give us a quick introduction to the work that you've got underway, and we could pick up the discussion from there.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'll do my best to be brief. So you can imagine, as I said, compulsive researcher, kid in the candy store situation, right, where I'm introduced to purchase journey data with over 1 million individual purchase journeys across geographies, across categories, literally everything. Which is, again, like one of those dream come trues to answer questions. We're all interested in behavior change, the power in marketing to actually influence how people move through these journeys and choices. And there it is, everything kind of laid bare in front of us. So my approach essentially is kind of twofold, and then one is to estimate an individual level heterogeneity. So we're all individuals, we're all different, and sometimes that really matters, sometimes it doesn't. But in that aspect of journey, what I try to look at is how easy are you to be influenced? So we all have an innate characteristic. We've developed much better words, but I've called is Felipe stubborn, right? And so I've been able to actually develop that Felipe stubbornness score. But we have that for the whole market of how easy are you to shift and how easy are you to shift from your position in a given category, which is initially useful. But then you say, given that score, how effective is each touch point that we have available to us in marketing to move somebody from their position? Whatever it is their choice, whatever is their consideration set, if you want to activate it, if you want to grab them, how powerful is every single touch point? And we start seeing then a diversity of effects across these influenceability scores. Some channels that are really good at moving the people that are hard to move. And almost every channel being really good to move everybody, somebody that moves with everything, right? So we started to get some really interesting disentangling of the significant power of various touch points to do things that are generally really hard to do.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'm so excited by this whole project being kind of underway. But I know that research is I'm fascinated by the transition from research from academia through to kind of industry publishing and then through to the the real world of advertising to marketers to budget setting. So Lilia, perhaps if I can come to you first. I'm kind of interested from a Colgate point of view. How do you think about research? How do you choose which research is going to be adopted across the organisation? What kind of role does it play in decision making for Colgate?
Yeah, absolutely. Research is important because the world changes very fast, right? So we need to be with the times. Now, the trick is always, there's a lot of really good research out there. The trick is embedding it into the organization and figuring out how to tell the story, because communication is not when you say something, it's when the person hears it, right? So coming to a company with a piece of research, even if it is brilliant, is not enough unless it's built into unless the company has processes to absorb it, right? And that's, the trick is basically, how does it link to what the company already does? Is there an MMM, marketing mix modeling, that they believe in, right? And then how do you link that research to some of the processes that they already have embedded to show that it enhances media effectiveness, right? Otherwise, it just kind of falls on top and it's disconnected, and it's much more likely that it's not going to be adopted.
Yeah. And do you find that there's a kind of natural capacity in the organisation for research? I mean, how much is too much? I know that Colgate's very interested in reach, and you're increasingly interested in attention. Do you try to standardise globally the research partners on the way that you think about it?
Yes, there is some global standardization, but there's always room for markets to embed new thinking into processes. But of course, there's a global way we look at media effectiveness. There's a standard marketing mix modeling process, but each market also, depending on their media landscape, on their buying strategies, on complexity of media channels, also has additional research that complements that global package.
Yeah, they can pick the thing that works for them. Alex, perhaps if I can come to you. So the work that Felipe and team are kind of developing at the moment is trying to move the conversation on a bit, perhaps from just thinking about reach and even thinking about attention to trying to centre a bit more of the dialogue in the industry on audiences that can be convinced, can be influenced, and that can be genuinely incremental sales. I'd be very interested in your perspective. Walk obviously sees all the research. You see pretty much everything that the industry is thinking about. How much diversity of thought is there, and how much do you see the industry just circling around the same questions again and again? I'm aware there's a lot of interest in attention, a lot of interest in reach. Is there a plurality of research thinking, or are we narrowing our focus from your perspective?
It's an interesting question. I think there inevitably is a narrowing of focus around trending topics that potentially clients are interested in, attention being one of the sort of classic examples you cited. I think that I think that one of the reasons actually Walk is very, very excited about the Wavemaker Oxford studies, because I think because you're taking a really broad view. And I think one of the challenges we have a little bit with a lot of the research that's coming out of the industry at the moment, certainly from my perspective on the media the side, is it's quite balkanised. So you have a lot of quite insular navel-gazing studies within a channel or even a platform level. The job that we try and do at Walk is to stitch some of that together. But obviously it's not always easy. These studies aren't necessarily like for like. Even within the field of attention, there's different methodologies, there's different approaches. So and I think you're right. There is a degree that we do sort of chase our tail a little bit with some of the same debates around, is what's more important? Is it reach or targeting, and optimal frequency? Now, in part, that is because clients keep asking us those questions. Sure. So they remain important. They remain front of mind. So we can't walk away from them. But I think something that looks at the industry and the research challenge from a new angle is really powerful.
Go ahead.
I was going to add, actually, we've gone as an industry. We've gone through from the school of STP, segmentation, targeted positioning, to the Church of Ehrenberg Bass, right? With the penetration is everything, and maybe perhaps you see that reflected in what questions clients ask, because we are obsessed with recruiting more people, right? That's the game, especially in categories that are highly penetrated. People already brush their teeth pretty much every day. Yeah. sometimes twice a day, right? Like there's consumption is limited in a way, so there's a lot of recruiting going on between competitors. So if we're going to be a little bit heretic and break the penetration story, we need data points to support that, right? So that we can actually achieve our goals of recruiting the people with different means.
Yeah.
Because right now this is what all we think of.
Yeah. So there's quite a few moving pieces in there that are really important. I think to your point is companies have historical blinders because you have your own history. So you observe what you have done, you know what has worked for you, and it becomes really easy for you to go, yeah, I know what is true because I know my business, I know my category. And there's value in that, but that blinder doesn't open your eyes to the realm of all possibilities because you don't explore possibilities, you just repeat. And MMMs tends to reinforce that, the modeling aspect that they do with strong priors. If you're a Bayesian person, like that's gonna say, just do yesterday. So you never learn, right? So that's a big problem. And I can lean on a number of different Oxford studies, not just myself, but Professor Andrew Stephen or Jason Bell, who's done work with me on these things as well, including attention. And things are more complicated and more nuanced, and there's a lot of money on the table that is being completely ignored by the industry, right? So if we look at campaigns that do reach, I can prove to you that we are optimizing reach, right? We've talked before and we've had conversations before, and if we look at 1,000 campaigns, of multi-million campaigns, they're all getting 95% reach. It's like, you have gotten your reach. And if you think, how do I get more? You're actually getting really low marginal returns on reach, like you're spending millions for that last individual, right? And you don't want to do that, which is idiotic. But then you say, so what? You got the reach. Did you get everything else you wanted, right? You are talking to that audience, but the average lift, the average ROI on those campaigns is 2%. To me, if I was the CFO, I'm throwing a tantrum. Right? And then if you look actually at the reallocation of those, not just reach, like you have to find people, but if you don't know what you're doing with that audience, how you're managing all of those other components, we've seen that you can go from 2% to at least like 18.5% in lift and return for a campaign. That's the gap of, I'm just going to do reach and penetration for my very large brand and business as usual. It's literally like a 16% extra return. That's, to me, is mind-blowing that people are still doing 1980s tech.
Yeah, it's an interesting observation, I think, that so many clients use exactly the same tools, and often in highly competitive categories. We're all planning to maximize reach, we're all planning to maximize attention, perhaps in that reach using the same data. It'd be quite hard to get a competitive advantage when we're optimizing to the same data. It becomes a matter of who has the largest spend. I'm interested in exploring a bit more this question between the kind of tension between optimization and insight. How do, this kind of stretch between are we being as efficient as possible with our spend as opposed to trying to create more effectiveness in it? Interested from a Colgate-Palmolive perspective, is the organisation more interested in frugality, in efficiency, or is it? How does it stay focused on consumer insight? It's a really important part of what you do.
It's a great question because over the last few years we've actually changed. We have two main metrics that we track. Well, we have a lot of metrics, but we don't just talk about media efficiency. We also talk about creative effectiveness, and they are different. Because we know creative has a significant influence on how much money we're going to generate out of a campaign, right? This is why we're here this week, right? We talk about the Festival of Creativity. And so we track media efficiencies, but we also are very, very obsessed about creative effectiveness. And then there are lots of KPIs under that, as you can imagine.
From a walk perspective, you obviously see what people come on the site, you see what people are searching, you see what they're downloading, so you have a kind of view into the psyche of the industry. Do people come mostly for efficiency style questions, or do people come and start to kind of play around with some perhaps kind of broader understandings about how consumers decide?
So
What's hot on
I'd
walk?
caveat my answer with what we like to think is that people that read walk and use walk are perhaps not necessarily the sort of pure performance heads that you might get elsewhere in the industry. So it's maybe a self-selected crowd. But there's no doubt that in the last kind of few years, the performance side of things has become much more central to what people are looking for. There's a lot more about efficiency. People, looking for precise ROI benchmarks for this, that, and the other. But I think what you say is really, really, really interesting about the sort of efficiencies versus taking things actually a step further. I mean, on the creative impact track at Cannes this week, I know the IPA gathered a few people together to talk about sort of the next frontier of effectiveness. And I think there is that creeping sense that actually we're sort of fine-tuning things here, but we haven't really thought about what is the sort of next stellar leap to take the industry forward to achieve the kind of results you're talking about, Felipe. And it's something we're definitely aware of.
Great. Let's talk about that stellar leap in a little bit more detail.
Yes.
Felipe. Obviously, the research is in kind of very, very early stages at the moment, but I think this sense that some audiences are just much more influenceable than others, and that the majority of impacts that clients are buying in the market are going to a kind of finite pool of people who are more affected by advertising. Perhaps you could talk just a bit more about just what we've discovered so far about what it means to be easily influenced or kind of harder to influence. It's quite an interesting concept.
Yeah. So it's I'll say it's an unusual distribution of consumers, and again, looking across all categories, we can do all sorts of cuts and explanations, and we know that the average is very different depending on what your category is, where you're playing. So there's there's variance that we can exploit and fine tune depending on where you play. But you think like your average consumer, like the average influenceability of somebody, it's kind of normally distributed. You have what you would have expected, but it's actually really dense on the edges. So you end up with a very large amount of individuals that are both hard to shift and a large amount of individuals that are very easy to shift. Right? So when you start thinking about, okay, so if that's my distribution, am I fighting for that individual that is responding to every stimulus? And that's worrisome if I'm building my market out of people that are very promiscuous with my brands, right? So if they're explorers, variety seeking, and some categories are more in that direction, that the consumption is variety seeking versus maybe personal care is less variety seeking, is more habit formation, and you end up with harder to shift individuals. Right, but we see this very, very dense areas. I think like when we're talking like the hard to shift people is over 20% of the population is really, really hard to move. The questions that usually come, so age plays a role. All the stuff that you would have expected, right? So if they're very, very young, then no, they're not making their choices. So you're not shifting. Once they become decision makers, then you actually see an increasing amount of ability to influence a younger population that starts declining with age. Okay, but that's about 21% of any person's individual score. 3% is gender. So if you want to make it a gender thing, I don't think it's not a gender thing. If you're looking at like over 70%, then of your ability to be shifted is a very individual aspect. Right, so that distribution, I think, is very important. Constructing and securing and protecting your installed user base can be further refined. It says, what if I lock my market in the hard to shift and I defend it? And then I gain things in the middle and I gain things on the people that are going to be unreliable buyers or individuals that are easy to shift or promiscuous in their consideration set. Yeah. Right, so there's that. And then we can go there's dynamics in the power of shifting things. If I can bring one in at least it's fascinating to me, and I think something that we need to talk about in terms of like being somewhat dangerous, because a couple immediate results. The channels are different. Okay, just the fact that we have different power across those different channels to influence people differently kind of throws away the whole market penetration and reach out, because channels are not fungible. If they're doing different things, I can't just reallocate my budget strictly on audience construction, because that choice is influencing your outcomes and you don't know. If they're different, I need to respect that difference. So that alone is interesting. The other bit was, it turns out that they're awfully stable. That power is awfully stable. So it's like, we do say like, everything's moving so fast, it's moving so fast. And yes, it feels that way. But if we look at the functionality, the truth, the ground truth of what TV does, what word of mouth does, what influencers do, what retail media does, all of those things are remarkably stable year on year. And we have years and years and years and years of data. So we say, like, is it shifting? And it's like tiny under a percentage power shift year to year. It's like, that is a known. So when you then see massive shifts, I worry. If everything is stable and a few are declining or a few are rising, that's a fundamental shift in the marketplace. Because it's either a design change in the delivery of the touch point, right? You've changed something about the operation. And you can think back to social media going from time-based feeds to algorithmic to time, like those are functional differences. And how people use it, that changes. I'll give one at least. Word of mouth, probably unsurprising to most of us, is incredibly powerful, okay? It, across every single category, it has a 50% chance of shifting somebody to purchase, okay? That is, we can have a long conversation about how do we create word of mouth and all of those, but if you get that, you're 50% of the way to a purchase. In the past 4 years, it's collapsed to 35%. Our single strongest tool, and the best one at moving the people that are really hard to shift, has collapsed. While everything else is equal, increasing, there's interesting things like branded content is getting better, all of those. But like, we really need to be mindful of how that works.
It tells you a lot about the power, the source of trust in our consumers' minds, and which links very well to channel preference and where we go to find them.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love this idea of sometimes our view of available channels being constrained by MMM or being constrained by the data or the way that we organisationally structure our business. Just as we kind of come to wrap up this session, I think it'd be interesting, what I enjoy a lot about Cannes is you often see work from different channels and different touch points in different places that you wouldn't, and it reminds me that other ways of communicating are possible. So as an entirely unfair, unprepared question, I would just be interested in, just when you've been here the last 3 or 4 days, what channel, what way of communicating do you think is kind of perhaps underrepresented, just something we don't think about enough, which has got potential? We spend a lot of time talking about TV or maximising digital video reach. Is there something that you think, you know what, there's something here that we don't spend enough time talking about? Sorry for a kind of difficult final question. You're nodding away, Alex, so I can come straight to you first.
Oh gosh, okay. Well, I'll amend my answer slightly in that I think the thing that's really interesting to me this year at Cannes is the amount of retail media, commerce media that's everywhere. You know, there's so many, obviously Amazon, but you know, Chase, Kroger, Uber, and that is a very under-researched part of the industry at the moment. We don't necessarily fully understand the role of those channels. Are they purely conversion? Obviously, those guys are trying to argue that they have a role further up the funnel. So I'm really interested in finding out more on that front, because at the moment it feels like yes, we know money's being spent, but do we know exactly what role it plays in the wider media mix?
So interesting, isn't it? Because even just the language of retail media doesn't really help us kind of break that down to its constituent parts. You know, it's super interesting.
You won't be satisfied with my answer because I don't think it's about channels at all. I think this year what is really interesting is to see people and campaigns really nail that human connection irrespective of channel. Right. It's about figuring out what's the spark that you want to tell, and then actually using a combination of channels to get that message across, to Felipe's point. So I think this is where the magic is. It's really not about channels. Sorry about the topic of this conversation.
No.
It's really about that human connection, finding that spark, that insight that is so simple that can travel across channels, and then making it happen.
Felipe, what's jumped out for you? What's been hot?
I'll steal part of your answer as well, but it's also a very unfair answer. So this happened at WPP Beach, and it was a conversation with Amazon, and they were talking about their advertising on their boxes, right? So, which is available to all of us. You just have to build a business the size of Amazon, and you will have the same channel available to you, right? But to me, it was really interesting. We have a tendency to want to classify and put things in a very narrow box of, not to do a pun, but doing one. We need to classify something as, is this social? Is this experiential? Is this that? Like, against which budget do I put this in, right? So it's like, I'm putting a logo on a package that people are excited to open, and that brand suddenly is in an unusual place. It's out of home, it's experiential, it's kind of and it's retail, and it's everything kind of all at once, and it's owned. Like he says, this is one of our largest owned channels. Owned media is our packaging. And it's like, wow, it's like you have a hybrid. You have this manticore of a channel that is pulling strings from various things. So there's absurd power in media. I was saying like this 50-50 creative and media. But if you can break yourself from thinking simply and just saying, oh, which bucket does this fit in? And you're saying, actually, how do I grab the best out of all these parts to build something crazy? You can find some really, really serious value. And that caught my attention, with the unfair component of, for you to own that channel, you have to be some massive conglomerate, which is not available to everybody. But we can use that mindset to exploit opportunities.
Well, fantastic. I'm really looking forward to seeing how the research over the next year starts to, will just help us understand the individual power influence scores of those channels. Because you're right, I think owned media, earned media, retail media, all these things, sometimes it's harder for us to quantify, harder for us to fit into our models, hard sometimes for us even to talk about, are going to be such strong levers of growth for all of our business moving forward. So thank you all so much for joining us this morning. Love that conversation. Thank you. We'll talk to you all soon.
Thank you.